I'm Carrie Adams, and you're listening to Carrie's Connoisseurs, coming to you from Solid Gold Podcasts. Here we talk to the movers and shakers, the drinkers, the dreamers, and all the people who make it happen in the liquor and luxury industries from around the world. Today in my studio, I've got friend and colleague, Fiona McDonald. I can't even start to tell you the contribution that Fiona's made to the South African wine industry. So we'll start with troublemaker, rebel-rouser, intellect, judge, taster. What do you do? Fee, welcome to Carrie's Connoisseurs. Thanks for agreeing to join me today.
Thanks, Carrie. It's good to be on.
What's your favorite thing to do in the industry?
Drink wine.
Yes, I know. And aside from that?
Write about wine.
Yeah. And whiskey.
And whiskey. And whiskey.
The reason that I've got you with me today, in fact, is, of course, because we're celebrating the life of a mutual friend and colleague, David Hughes, who died last week.
Monday.
And after, I think, quite a long period of frailty and ill health. But I'm not going to do all of that talking. I'm going to get you to do that talking, because I think of all of us in the industry, you were very close to Dave and his wife Lorna for many, many years, a good friend more than a colleague. So let's just talk about him. Tell me about when you first met David Hughes.
Wow, the first time I met Dave was when I was a news reporter on the Mercury in Durban. And Dave came up to do a tasting for the Nederburg auction. And I mean, I was absolutely in awe. You know, I was taking my baby steps in wine, and I didn't know very much, but I had heard about Dave Hughes because he was just kind of one of the preeminent personalities in the industry. And so I was, as I said, I was in awe of meeting him, but he was just so humble. And sorry, we've
somebody phoning you, Fee.
Things are happening here that I don't even know about.
I have to just tell my listeners and my watchers that my poor sound engineer has been, he's like a gorgeous, trendy Gen Z. Are you a Gen Z, Cal? He's a Gen Z. He knows lots more than you and me put together. So I say to him, we're going to be interviewing my friend Fiona about another mutual friend, David, who's passed away. He says, fine, get hold of her and I will explain to her how we do this thing via a program or whatever it's called, Riverside. And it needs to be done via a laptop or whatever. So guys, Fiona comes back. She says, I'd love to chat to you, Carrie, but my laptop doesn't have a camera or a microphone or something. So I tell Callum this. He says, no. Tell Fiona she's looking at her TV remote. That's not a laptop. Anyway, guys, so with huge difficulty, Fiona McDonald and Carrie Adams have finally got themselves into a studio generated and powered by this terribly frustrated but darling Gen Z. So, Callum, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your patience, Callum.
We're going back to David Hughes, and you met him when you were on the Natal Mercury.
Yeah, so, and he was just, you know, I was in awe. I was meeting, I mean, it was like the equivalent of someone meeting Beyonce for the first time, and that's who he was to me. Not like Dave was Beyonce, but it was like kind of that sort of status.
Yeah, caliber, I get you.
And he was, you know, he was just this amazing guy, but he was just so modest and so humble and so gentle and so sweet, and he never had any, I mean, you know Dave. Dave never had any airs and graces about him, despite all the honors that he'd achieved and the people that he knew and the circles that he moved in internationally. He was just, whether you were literally the street sweeper or you were the president of the country, Dave would have been exactly
always the same. And Fee, how old were you? How long ago was that?
What's Carrie? We're going back to the 90s here, early 90s, 91, 92, thereabouts. So it was a good 30 years ago.
Well, just for everybody's edification, David Hughes was one of the pillars, really, I think, of the South African wine industry. He was a Zimbabwean, or a Rhodesian, as he liked to think of himself. He was born in a house near a gold mine, I think, from memory. to a family where he really revered his father. I can remember David telling me stories about his dad, who he revered and loved and respected. And you can lead us through his life because he went into the military, and I'm not sure how he got from the military into a brewery or a distillery, but I remember him telling me that he did.
I'm actually not even 100% certain of quite how that happened.
No, I don't think anyone is.
He spent time in the military, absolutely, and I think at one point he was actually slated to go to Sandhurst Military College. I mean, this is just one of the many things, and then due to circumstances that didn't happen from what I recall. And I'm not certain how he got his job, but he worked for African Distillers up in Rhodesia, as it was then. And during his time there, spent time in Scotland and even in France. I mean, I remember him telling stories about being in Marseille when the rum agricole would be shipped in from the West Indies.
Oh, really?
And allied to that is a little anecdote years later of him being on a plane flying to Cuba. And if memory serves me correctly, he was actually flying on his brother's passport because his brother had an Irish passport. And of course, in those days, South Africans couldn't fly to Cuba, or the government didn't want you to do so, and you didn't want any official Cuban stamps in your passport. So he flew from the UK on his own passport to the States, and then utilized his brother's passport to get into Cuba. But years later, once everything was a little bit more copacetic, he was on a flight somewhere, and they on those little drop-down TVs, they were showing some in-flight entertainment, and he said to his absolute surprise there was a video of him that had been taken somewhere talking about rum, but he said, I didn't know I could talk French so well. That obviously dubbed his voice. So he'd done the interview, but he all his words had been dubbed into French.
Okay.
So from African Distillers, he ended up coming to South Africa in 1969 to your part of the world, Germiston. And helped set up something for SFW.
One does wonder what magnet brought him in the direction of Germiston, but we'll forgive him for that for now. He did start the Cape Wine Academy, didn't he?
Correct. That was in 1979. Yeah, he was instrumental in that.
So he came to Johannesburg, and I think that he got involved. His first sort of involvement in the South African booze industry was really SFW, which later became Distill, really, didn't it?
Yeah.
And he was very instrumental in the making. I remember him telling me that he loved to mentor the winemakers because he felt that education was just such a, no more. I always remember he taught me that little anecdote that I've applied my whole life. No more, and it's not N-O more, it's K-N-O-W more. So David taught us all to know more, and that's one of my lasting memories. He came to Germiston, and
then, I think the whole SFW thing happened because of his being identified by Ronnie Milk as someone who could, move on and go places. And he eventually moved out of production into more people and communications and marketing. And I know he had a stint in Durban, and I remember him telling me another anecdote about it being a time when Sol Kersner was still employed by one of the Durban hotels. And
Elangeni probably. Oh, mind you, before he built the Elangeni.
Substantially in arrears. And Dave said to Mr. Kersner, I'm sorry, but we're going to cut you off. That's it. And it was right about the time that Mr. Kersner was trying to set up Southern Sons, and if he'd been cut off, it would have taken those plans out at the knees. So Dave had all these little nuggets of information that he just...
Oh, no, he also had, he was tiny. Do you remember? David was a tiny little man. He was a man of very, very slight stature, but he had bigger balls than anybody we ever knew on planet Earth. David was, I can imagine him having been an amazing soldier, because he was so courageous and so brave, and he rushed in where, honestly, angels fear to tread. So I can imagine him telling Sol Kersner to what off. I can imagine him do that.
words followed by off.
Yeah, starting with fa and ending with fa. So he went from Durbs back to Cape Town, I think, and he got married in the meantime and had a daughter, didn't he?
Yeah, and he was married when he came down to South Africa, to the first Mrs. Hughes, and had a daughter. Yeah, and it was, you talk about the influence that people had on others' lives. I mean, one of the people he got to know when he first moved down to the Cape was Tony Mossop, and it was through him that Tony Mossop developed a love of wine. And, if it wasn't for Tony Mossop and his love of wine, we wouldn't have Miles Mossop. So all these little
And we wouldn't
strands,
have half the port. We wouldn't have half the port that we've got in the country. Because Tony Mossop and David were Mr. Port squared. I mean, I can remember many a drunken afternoon with those two boys on port in the rainy, misty Cape weather. They loved it.
Yeah.
So Sherry did. He did loads of international judging. He wrote books. He, as we say, started the Cape Wine Academy, which has gone on to be an amazing asset to the South African industry. And when he left SFW, I think, which was in Disto, I think I then reconnected with David, because I went to live in England in the meantime. But I reconnected with Dave when he was quite involved with Diners Club. And he used to chair the Diners Club Winemaker of the Year judging panel. And they invited me to sit. He invited me to sit on that judging panel some 17, 18 years ago. And that's when I sort of reconnected with Dave Hughes. And I can clearly remember, I think a lot of people questioned my chairmanship of judging panels, but it is completely and utterly dictated to by Dave Hughes. He was so, what's the word? He was so calm. And there was so little fuss and faff that surrounded Dave's chairmanship of judging panels. And it was so sublimely and ultimately fair.
Indeed.
Do you agree?
If I think about Dave chairing panels, I mean, I'm going right back to the early 2000s when I took over at Wine Magazine. Dave would come in and if he was chairing a panel, everything would just be superbly organized. You spoke about him being a soldier, and if there's one thing that I remember from our year when we walked the Camino together in 2004, was Dave's discipline. Dave always had like a standard operating procedure, SOP, the American military calls it. And Dave would have a standard operating procedure. When he arrived for a tasting, he would have his little apron, and he would put his apron on and tie it in the front, and he would kick his shoes off under the table. He liked to taste barefoot. I don't know whether he did that in the UK when he was at Dunsfold.
Always.
But he would always in his little bag that he brought along with him, his little soft briefcase. He always had a thermometer, and he would put a thermometer into the glasses to see whether they were actually at optimum temperature. I've never known anyone else in all my years of judging, and that's both locally and abroad, Decanter, Concours Mondial, IWC, IWSC. I've never seen anybody else ever do that. And he would monitor how the temperature was.
He did, and he would send stuff back if it was too warm, if you remember. But there was never any pomp and ceremony or fuss and palaver with Dave Hughes. He was, what you saw was honestly what you got. There was nothing malicious or vindictive or ugly or scandalous about Dave Hughes. He was just a gorgeous guy, wasn't he?
He was a real beautiful soul. I mean, he was very gentle in his dealings with all people from all walks of life.
And he was
his
funny.
faith was very important to him. Sorry?
He was very funny.
He was
He had a
very
great
funny.
sense of humor.
And the next anecdote, Dan Nicholl asked me yesterday, he said he's never encountered anyone who's got a bad word to say about Dave. And I said, yeah, that's certainly true. But I was thinking about it last night, and I know that Erica Platter certainly bore him a little bit of malice, because in the days when, subsequent to Dave's first marriage ending and before he'd met Lorna, Dave was very much a confirmed bachelor for 10, 15, if not more years. And he would socialize with the Platters and the Webbs and so forth. And I remember there was one story he told me about inviting John and Erica Platter around to his flat in Andringa Street for a curry. Because, as you know, Erica loves a good curry. I mean, she's authored books about the damn things. And she was so impressed that this confirmed bachelor had made her a curry that was really impressive. And she said, "This is so tasty. What blend of spices did you use? And, did you play with the dhania? How much ginger did you use?" And Dave's just giving her as much string as she'd like. He's just absolutely wheeling her along. And at the end of the evening, he said, "Erica, I'm going to tell you my secret to this perfect curry." And he hauls out a little box of Cartwright's curry powder, which is like as bare bones basic as you can get. Apparently, Erica was spitting and fuming. And then there was someone's birthday at Mama Roma's in Stellenbosch where he hatched up a plan to put nitrous oxide. I think it was also, again, the Platters were involved. It was someone's significant birthday. And they put nitrous oxide through the aircon. Apparently, it was the most hilarious party that they've ever had. Everybody was laughing their heads off.
It's happy gas, yeah. Just for anyone who doesn't know. No, he was fun, and he had a I think he changed it every day. One of those very old-fashioned answering machines on his telephone.
Yeah.
So if you phoned Dave Hughes and he didn't answer, there was always a message of the day. I mean, where did that come from?
I don't know where it came from, but it was certainly something he did every single day. When I was talking about the rigor and the discipline, when on the Camino he had a way of getting up in the morning and he'd shower and get all his kit ready. And when we finished walking of an afternoon, he'd go and shower and change and wash his clothes, and then he would sit outside and he would polish his boots, his marching boots, because he said, "Your boots are going to get you from point A to point B, so you take care of them." And that was his military training. But he had this rigor where he would get up, honestly, at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning every morning. And it used to drive Lorna nuts because he very kindly would bring her a cup of tea. He's like, he's up, so she must now have a cup of tea. It was a very sweet gesture, but, she didn't necessarily want to wake up at 5 o'clock either. But he would wake up at 4 and he would go through to his office and he would do a set of exercises he was very keen on keeping fit. He was always a very, very fit man, ran... I know he had his comrades green number, so that's more than 10 comrades.
Yes, he did.
The Two Oceans Ultra Marathon and a host of other races. You talk to people in the running fraternity and they all knew Dave. But he would do his exercises and then he would do his Catholic devotions. He would do his readings and his prayers, go through, make Lorna a cup of tea. Where was I going with the story? I've completely...
We were going with the rigor, and I was talking about the answering service that gave us a little message of the day.
During that period, he would record. He would invariably line up whatever the date was, and he would give you a little bit of history about what happened in this year and 1649 and then in 1724 this happened and it's a very happy birthday to Alan Mullins or Carrie Adams or whoever. And he'd give you a little synopsis, and by the time you're still sitting waiting to say, "How's it, Dave? It's Fiona here. I just need to get hold of you to talk about XYZ." You'd almost completely lost your train of thought because you'd been entertained for at least 2, if not 3 minutes.
Yeah, he was brilliant. Fee, when did he meet Lorna? I know that Lorna was a great mate of yours. I didn't know Lorna particularly well, but I do remember when David married her, and I think that they had an incredibly happy time together for many years, but there was quite a big age difference between him and Lorna. And whenever you get...
It was almost exactly 20 years because Dave, Lorna and myself are all Geminis and we're all within 3 weeks of each other. So I'm on the 24th of May, Lorna was the 29th and Dave was the 12th of June. So there were a lot of personalities involved when we got together. They must have met...
6 of you, to say the least, yeah.
Exactly. He must have met Lorna around about the late 90s, 98 or 99, at the Devon Valley Hotel. David Nathan Meister takes credit for introducing them over a particularly bibulous evening at, shall we say, at his home one night. And they just hit it off. And got married in early 2000. I think it was in about April 2000. 2001. And I actually got to know Lorna through Dave. She was a really, really good friend of mine and someone I cared for very, very deeply. And
yes,
Dave,
and she very sadly also passed away last year in a car accident.
Car accident, yeah.
I think that might have been the catalyst that tipped Dave over the edge. He was very frail last year. And the last time I saw him, I'm trying to think the last time I saw David. I think it was before COVID, Fee.
Wow.
I invited him to a Diners Club function because I took over his role at Diners Club, and I invited him to a function, and we had to get him there specially. It was hard, and he was very frail, but he was loved and funny to the last day that I ever saw him. And I think he was very, very sick and frail last year. I didn't see him. For David, it's a happy release. I'm happy for him.
Absolutely. I think everybody who knew him and had seen him in the last year or two will be like, sure, Dave's finally out of his pain. He wasn't particularly sick towards the end. He just kind of, in his typical quiet fashion, he was
just
admitted to
slipped
hospital
away
on Sunday and breathed his last on Monday evening without making too much of it.
Please God, we can all do that with a nice glass of Chardonnay. I hope he had something gorgeous in his glass when he took his last sip. Did he?
It was arranged. When I saw him and Sue Wardrop and myself went round at midday on Monday, and one of the concerns we had was that Dave needed a glass of wine with his evening meal, because that was...
You should have phoned me. I'd have sent you a bottle of Petrus or something. He honestly did deserve it. He just did so much for all of us, didn't he?
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people don't really appreciate what he did for the South African industry at a time when our flag wasn't flying very high in international circles. Yes, South African wine was available, but, particularly in the UK market, where people expressed their disaffection for the apartheid government by not buying South African wine, Dave was at the International Wine and Spirits competition, and that was always chaired by an international personality. So be it Madame de Lenkesang, Baroness Rothschild, Robert Mondavi, people of that
ilk. Some big hitter.
Dave knew them on first-name terms. I mean, he used to talk about Marchese Antinori coming. He invited them out. They would come out to South Africa, and he invited Marchese Antinori out. And he remembers someone, it might have been the Mosse family, teaching Antinori's kids to surf on Strand Beach. That they got to experience a little bit of South Africa.
For a few bottles of nice Barolo or something, it could have been arranged.
At least, yeah.
No, he was. I think nobody better than you to remember him and remind us of the many, many things that he did do for the industry. And more than that, just the levity that he brought. He brought enough seriousness to give the industry a big injection of Hughes knowledge, which we all needed. But there was always this lovely lightness of being about Dave Hughes that I loved. We laughed a lot. We made each other laugh. And I didn't have the privilege of working with him enough. But I did have the privilege of working with him sometimes. So I'll remember him always for those happy things and the wonderful knowledge that he brought to me. I think you should write a book about your life and times, and Dave Hughes would be a very, very big part of that. He loved you. I know that he was terribly, terribly fond of you. Both he and Lorna were very fond of you, which is why I asked you to be my guest today.
Well, when they celebrated because they did a joint celebration of their big O birthdays, when Lorna turned 50 and Dave turned 17, it was a very small, intimate dinner at the house in Devon Valley with 15 dogs around. And Dave he stood up and he went around the table and he said to, Dame P, you've been a big part of my life, and I appreciate working with you, and Benny Howard and all the people who were there. And someone actually said, but you haven't said anything about Fiona. And he said, well, Fiona doesn't need anything said about her. She's family. And, they say that the friends are the family that you choose. And I truly count myself blessed and my life enriched by having been taken into the fold so warmly and so generously by both Dave and Lorna.
100%. Fee, to sort of round it all up and pull the drawstring on the toilet bag, what's happening to all Lorna's dogs? Is the son looking after all of them? Because she ran a home for homeless dogs, as she would have done. She just also had a heart of complete and utter gold, didn't she?
Yeah. And you know, I think the reason they had so many dogs is because Dave was a soft touch, because Lorna would take in the mommy dogs and the puppies and bottle feed the puppies and then adopt the puppies out, and then Dave would say, "Yeah, but mommy dog's been here for 2 months now, and you can't send her to the welfare. You can't put her in a kennel. She's part of our pack." And so, you know, I mean, I think they've got 5 mommy dogs there with Riley and a whole host of them. And Dave was he was a soft touch. And his office had a bed, because Dave was also famous for taking little naps. And he had a bed, and that bed was invariably occupied by at least 3, if not 4 or 5 dogs. So yeah,
it's actually quite a good thing for all of us. That's a leaf to take out of David's book. For each of us to put a bed in our home office. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
we could take a nap sort of in between podcasts, in between judging. We could just go and have a nap. He wasn't so stupid after all. Fee, it's gorgeous chatting to you.
He would lie down on the floor under a table. He really was not fussy. And the other thing, Carrie, is, I'm sure you remember this, but every dinner he went to, he would always take the bottles home with him, and he would soak off the labels, and he would meticulously keep those labels. The viniticulous is the correct term.
I wonder where that collection of labels is, to be honest, because it was
in file cabinets. They're in file cabinets, and meticulously the date of the event, the description of the event, who was there, and then a little. He also used to do a little dab. He used to do a dab on the paper for the color. All of that's in a file, meticulously kept. I don't have that rigor.
Well, that's definitely for the museum. Maybe we must give that to Mr. Rupert. He'll put it in a museum somewhere. It must be filled with 1 million labels. Do you know that my last story about Dave, I remember hearing when I was in England and learning and studying and doing my stuff, that Dave Hughes, who was very instrumental in the launch of Lieberstein wine in South Africa. Yeah. I think in one particular year, long before you and I were anywhere near the wine industry, I think it was 70 or 78 or something like that. And Lieberstein, that was really Dave Hughes's baby, sold 30 million litres. At the time, it was the single biggest selling wine in bottle in the world. Yeah. So, right. I mean, he thought big, as tiny as he was. He thought big, and he did stuff that did sort of get out into the world, and he sang South Africa from the rooftops. So Zimbabwe's loss was definitely our gain. Yeah. And I think that his death is now our loss. So thank you so much. I mean, I can't think of anybody better to have spoken to and remembered David as happily as we have. Today, I want everybody this evening to raise a glass to Dave Hughes in the whole country and send him on his way. I hope he's landed in a cloud, not full of Lieberstein necessarily, because I don't think any of us want a Lieberstein cloud, but maybe something nice, maybe a nice tawny port or a whiskey. He was a whiskey distiller as well. He could make whiskey and he could make brandy.
And rum.
Any of the above.
And vodka. Anything. Loved his gin.
So everybody in South Africa, raise your glasses this evening to David Hughes and Lorna Hughes, who jointly and severally added to every single one of our lives in some form or fashion in the liquor industry. Fee, thank you so much. Lots of love to you. We chat soon.
Definitely. Thanks, Carrie.
Another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.